So it's now been right around a year since Counter-Strike 2 was first fully released to the public in September of 2023, specifically on the 27th of September, making CS2 in around 1 week's time a full year old. Now, if you include the game's first reveal and start of the limited test, the game has been out for well over a year and a half, and that's just the beginning. Counter-Strike 2 as it stands right now isn't a whole lot different from when it first released. Now don't get me wrong, game-breaking bugs and issues of subtick, connection and optimization, and even content has improved since launch, but it's really not much, and from most players' perspectives, including myself, it's just not enough to feel like CS2 was justified to take over the Counter-Strike franchise, meanwhile deleting CSGO. Will Counter-Strike 2 ever live up to the leaks, rumors, and all the expectations we had all those years ago? Today's video is a deep dive into the day that Counter-Strike will finally come home, which is code for a couple of things, one of them being CS2 1 year later, but also what Counter-Strike 2 needs in order to be a final and polished product. Now today's video sponsor is SkinsMonkey. SkinsMonkey is a CS2 trading site for all your skin needs. Whether you're choosing to deposit your in-game items or real-life cash, SkinsMonkey has it all. If you choose to trade yet need to top up your balance, you can do so by also using my code MANDO for a free $5. Alongside depositing, you get an additional 35% of a deposit bonus. With SkinsMonkey's large variety of skins, they also offer daily, weekly, and monthly giveaways. If interested, the link will be in the top of the description down below. Now this is myself in the post edit and wanted to quickly mention that today's video is part 1 of 2. The second video will be uploaded Friday on CS2's birthday, that being on the 27th. Today's video, that being part 1 of 2, mainly breaks down Valve's failed launch, starting with the game's first reveal in March of 2023. And Friday we go into further detail of the good, the bad, and what can be improved on for Counter-Strike's future. And after writing, recording, and editing today's video, there was a couple of things I forgot to mention throughout today's video. So here we are now. And one of them being is the fact that I've written today's video script a few times over, and one of the earliest copies was in March of 2023, which yes, that would have been very early, but it's also pretty crazy that I could have used that exact video script for today's video with minimal changes. I think that just really further proves into detail of how much this game has really improved and changed for the better. At the time, we maybe didn't really realize it, but we do now, and that's that CS2 was to replace Counter-Strike Global Offensive. And for graphics-wise and future-proofing the franchise, that's all fine and dandy. Valve did actually a solid job. But where this game lacks is content. Old and new maps that were once free on CSGO are now gone and possibly never coming back to official servers. Dozens of maps and modes such as Danger Zone have yet to see a return. Skins are still bugged 1 full year later, and creators of original skins that once had them in CSGO that have now been ported to CS2 have even made updated and Source 2 models and versions of those said skins that all Valve has to do is come in, take what the original creator had to do, put it in CS2 and slap their logo on it and call it a day, yet they've not done that. And I'm not sure if they ever will. And what tells me anyway, right off the rip, that CS2 is not a complete or should be labeled as a full game is the fact that CS2 only has 1 achievement. Now yes, Counter-Strike isn't like every other game, but CSGO, decade-old game, had 100 or so achievements. And for those who had completed them, including myself, have nothing to show for it. Not certainly the work and effort that you put into it, it's just the fact that it was deleted just like a Thanos snap. And I'm not really sure what's more crazy, the fact that CS2 has 1 achievement or only the fact that 25% of players have actually unlocked it. Now for the game only having 1 main objective that you can showcase in your Steam profile, you might be thinking it's pretty insane or hard to do, when in reality all you have to do is get 2 kills in quick succession and that's a wrap, and now you completed Counter-Strike 2. Now this is, yes, once again myself in the post edit, but I also want to throw in here that another thing that shows that CS2 is not a final product is really just the attention to detail, but specifically the small things such as achievements, yes, but also modes such as Training Day. Back in CSGO, there was a mode that you can still play to this day on the CSGO Legacy port of the game, where once booted up, a voice command prompt would show you how to shoot, spray, move, throw nades, plant and defuse the C4 with even a mini game mode inside the already similar game mode to Shoot House from Call of Duty 4. Now this is where you're timed to see how fast you can clear all the bots inside of a site. This is such a small feature, but imagine this inside Counter-Strike 2. There could be world and friend leaderboards, some people would have strats to try and beat the fastest time, and this could go on forever. Valve maybe once a month or every 6 months could clear the leaderboards, make it a fresh start, but also add parts to this training mode where it could be more competitive, players had to find new and better strats, but I do suppose the community has already done this inside the workshop, or at least things similar. Now CS2, for those who are wondering, yes, does have a training day, but it's only a shell of its former self. I suppose this time around in Counter-Strike 2, it's more of a realistic mode where it puts you into a casual game, showing you the buttons and ideas of how to win your first few rounds. Now, like we mentioned at the beginning of the video, launch versus now isn't much different aside from bugs and minor issues with subtick and connection, which for those who have forgotten or maybe are new to the Counter-Strike franchise, a lot of this got fixed 2 months or closer to launch. As it stands for content, we obviously got the arms race update and 1 monthly major update, but it wasn't always guaranteed to be content. There are some things that were just a given to come to CS2, one of them being major stickers. We're always going to get them every single major that's hosted by Valve. Music kits are practically a given every single year, as well as the one-off sticker capsule. And based off the last couple of years of Counter-Strike releases, we're also guaranteed to at least get 1 case a year. Now Valve has given that, it's just they've given the least by just passing the class. Now for the most part, updates since the Copenhagen Major have been extremely lackluster and inconsistent, which in my opinion is most likely due to CS devs working on future current titles such as Half-Life 3 or possibly Deadlock. As well as to again go a little off script, this could also be a reason why Counter-Strike Counter-Strike doesn't see as many updates, as much content as other Valve titles. The first one is obviously case unboxings. Valve rakes in a boatload of cash, even in their worst months. A little while ago, we had the quote-unquote worst month in Counter-Strike's history in well over a couple of years, yet the player count was well over 1 million, and Valve still made $70 million just from cases alone. So for a quote-unquote bad month, that's not too bad. Maybe some of, if not the majority of the devs over there at Valve see if Counter-Strike ain't broke, then why would you fix it? But obviously as an everyday Counter-Strike player, and most of you guys could probably agree with this, the game needs a polish. Now when rumors began turning real with hard evidence that Source 2 Counter-Strike was coming and was no longer a leak, player numbers on CSGO alongside the skins market began to shoot up in prices, but also the game's popularity in ways we've really never seen before. Now after Valve showcased their 3 awesome trailers on their YouTube channel, the limited test released, which on paper was actually a great idea, and even now I'm actually happy it happened. It's just the execution was really rough, with 5% or less of the CS player base, even at the limited test's peak, being able to actually launch and play the game. Now where some of the letdown for Counter-Strike 2 maybe began is the lack of features with this brand new game. Now I'm not talking about content, I'm talking features, such as an anti-cheat. Now there's not a whole lot of information based on this today, but dating back to CS2's limited test FAQ, there was supposed to be a whole section dedicated to VACnet 3, or at the time we thought VACnet 2, an entirely brand new anti-cheat just for CS2, using AI and Overwatch from CSGO or something of that nature to help prevent cheaters inside Counter-Strike 2. Now with CS2 being out for almost over a year, we got that 2 months ago, not during the game's release. Now the obvious reason for that was most likely because it wasn't ready, but my questions have arisen is nor was the game. Now we could argue about this until the end of time, but Counter-Strike 2 was not ready to come out of that limited test. More people needed to be added, and a lot of the problems that we have now, let alone content missing from CSGO and other Counter-Strike games prior, could have been present and also finished when CS2 first released. Now when the game fully released out of the blue, it took the community by storm. Most thought it was going to be a limited test with more players being able to access it over more time throughout the next few months, but that was obviously not the point and not what Valve was trying to do. They thought the game was ready and they greenlighted it. Now for the first few weeks after Counter-Strike 2's release, we started to see the most amount of support we've ever seen from Valve and a lot of the CS devs, where we got operation and gigabyte-sized blog posts pretty much on the daily, if not twice a day for months on end. Yet starting in December of 2023, things started to really slow down and some may say go downhill. I'd say for the most part, all the forgotten maps from CSGO that were also showcased in the CS2 trailers, like Train, Lake, Short Dust, most of us thought that those were going to get released similar to how the main map pool maps got released for CS2, where one was released at a time for maybe a 1 to 2 week period, maybe longer, all the bugs got patched and we can move on to the next bit of content. And what's weird is most players didn't even consider that to be content at the time because it's what we had at CSGO, versus nowadays if we got a map or mode from CSGO that we once had that was in the game for free, that is now considered to be brand new. Now an argument to this is Valve does have to port it over to CS2, port it onto the Source 2 engine, and essentially recreate it, but does that justify it as new content? And speaking of a new release, we got our first major content update in February of 2024, with the call to arms, adding back arms race, shoots, baggage, a new capsule, as well as a new case and fixes. This, in my opinion, looking back to this time, was an operation filler, since the devs were working on titles we now know to be Deadlock, Half-Life 3, but also after production of CS2. For the years prior, many players in the community could only assume that many of the devs that worked on CS2 felt a major burnout working on the game. And since the motto at Valve is you can work on what you want when you want, most of them probably left and they just did the bare minimum, really until now, which they have. We really only started getting major updates as of recently to remove game-breaking bugs that the community had found and patched before anyone at Valve was aware and fixed it themselves. Now, with the point that I was trying to make where the community found and patched all the bugs before Valve was aware, is that Counter-Strike's community, just like in prior titles, but more so with CS2 this time around, are really the only people and beings to create content for this game to keep this franchise alive. You have game and map creators making their own maps and modes inside CS2, which yes, they're only available for the workshop, and speaking of the workshop, this also wasn't available at release, it was available a few months later. The content the community has made has brought way more hype and enjoyment than anything Valve has put out throughout this last year. Now with all of this being said, that begs the question of when Counter-Strike will finally come home. When will CS2 become the game it swore to destroy, that being CSGO? Now to answer the question of when Counter-Strike will finally come home also brings us to another question of what went wrong with CS2's release. How can CS2, aside from titles like Half-Life 3, be the most anticipated game of the year, maybe decade, especially for Valve, and flop as hard as they did? And I will say, also take this with a grain of salt. And to answer both of these things, it all goes back to support and the lack of it, that being from CS devs, but also everyone at Valve. Valve as a whole only has 300 to 400 devs on staff, and has been reported at times to only have on staff 5 to 12 devs working on CS2 at any given time, or just Counter-Strike in general. Now to think if things were on the side of the community versus Valve, you'd think with a company making $1 billion a year and millions of players on daily, that being CS2, that something was bound to change, but in my opinion, I think it's just quite the opposite. Yes, the game right now is broken, cheaters are rampant, and the devs over there at Valve really said, hey, here's CS2, it's half of what CSGO had, you get to keep your skins and you're gonna take it and like it. It also has better graphics, but piss poor performance. But in my opinion, the devs players are in a constant lose-lose scenario. If they update the game, Counter-Strike 2 is a loss. If they don't update, it's still a loss. If they patch or release an operation, it's a loss. Something will and always is broken, and one of the many sub-communities inside the game will be pissed for the lack of support for their content. If it's the skins community not getting a case, pro scene not getting an optimization or something that need fixed, game creators and workshop mappers not getting the tools they need to be fixed, or just add for something later in the future, you get the point. Now, does this excuse the lack of work and content, let alone features from CSGO that was supposed to be ported to CS2? Probably not. Now, where Valve went wrong with CS2, in my opinion, was deleting CSGO right after CS2's launch, because CS2 really until the last few months was still in a limited test or some sort of beta. And arguably right now to most players, it's still in some sort of limited test. Whatever PC you had during CSGO, for a lot of players, it was some sort of potato. And I'd say for the most part, we were lucky to run on a potato PC for as long as we did for a 20-year-old game. Let alone we're still playing on a 20-year-old game, it's still getting consistent updates with 1 million players a day. That's pretty awesome and pretty rare for most games nowadays. But a basic optimization update is normally expected for most games after its release, maybe a couple of months, maybe 6 months in, just not a year, and this is where a lot of players are getting frustrated. Quickly discussing ping, you have the same mild ping from CSGO, that being 20 to 50. Well, that feels in CS2 at times as high as something like 80 to 120, and much to do with that is because of subtick. Not all of it, just some of it.
So what you see is what you get.
Yeah, that sounds good on paper, but was horribly executed. After a decade-long argument of 64 versus 128 tick, Valve hard-coded Counter-Strike 2 to be 64 tick, not even letting third-party clients have and run 128 tick on their software. All sub-tick really does is, one, it works if you have decent internet, well, really good internet, but for the average PCs and average players from CSGO transitioning into CS2, and all sub-tick does is add 5 more layers to the top of it that has to process while you're playing the game. But what do I know? I'm not a coder, I'm a content creator and everyday Counter-Strike player. Now, with this all being said, to conclude today's video, what can Counter-Strike do to finally come home? And what I mean by that is, what can Valve and possibly the community add, fix, or help to make CS2 the main Counter-Strike experience, the only experience? Because on paper, especially with what CS2 is capable of on the Source 2 engine, this franchise could keep going for another 20 plus years. And a quick answer to what Counter-Strike needs to finally come home is, in my opinion, just the basics from what CSGO didn't have and what CSGO did have, if that makes any sort of sense. Create and then add what CSGO can never have because of the Source 1 limitations. Add the revolutionary anti-cheat that Valve has supposedly been working on for the last decade. Now, this from most players' perspectives is just the basic fundamentals, such as the maps, modes, and features from previous Counter-Strike titles, such as CSGO. Now, let me know what you guys think down below of Counter-Strike 2 1 year later. I think if Valve just has better communication with us, the players, maybe a roadmap of content that's coming soon or will come in the future, and maybe also just being able to address a certain situation, if that's a bug, the state of one of the sub-communities, what have you at any point on social media, that would be awesome and be a pretty big game changer. When you have what feels like every other game company coming out with an anti-cheat, or at least announcing it, but also has a fraction of the income and a quarter of the players that CS2 does, it's kind of depressing. Now, despite my ranting and nitpicking of Counter-Strike 2 1 whole year later, I couldn't be more excited for the second year of Counter-Strike to come any sooner. And according to Valve, year 2 is where all the content and features and maps and modes start to really start flowing. Now, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Hopefully next year's in-depth review for Counter-Strike 2 year 2 will be much better than the first. Ladies and gentlemen, Fallout.